Well, Poper, nothing like an episode of OHL Stories where we've got some stories kind of banked. We had made our long trip up to Sault Ste. Marie now a couple of weeks ago, and that was going to be the focus of our podcast last week, but it ended up being a podcast with a Prince Edward Islander, not to mention somebody from Summerside, which is the same place that Don Cameron, the late great, hailed from. So it turned into just a little trip down Don Cameron memory lane, some stories about him, and then an Islander on the podcast. So we've got a little bit in the bank from that trip up north. But boy, oh boy, it was a lot of fun with Billy McGuigan last week. And the internet seems to love him too. My goodness gracious, the feedback that we've been getting on Billy's podcast.
Well, it's great. He told some good stories. And when we started talking about Don, and we kind of had our plan as to what we were going to talk about in this preamble, and we started talking about Don, it was just the perfect segue. How do you not? And I mean, I for one will listen to any Don story anytime. I don't think we should ever, push a Don story just because we have something else to talk about. His stories rule over everything.
On Twitter just today, and you can find us, by the way, I'm at Farwell_OHL, and Poper is at _Chris Pope. Another one of our previous podcast guests, Pete Krupper, the one-time voice, the only voice, play-by-play voice that the Plymouth Whalers organization had ever known. He's now with U.S. Hockey. But Krupper shared a photo of he and Don Cameron on Twitter today that we both reshared. And he talked about him being the Vin Scully or the Ernie Harwell of the Ontario Hockey League. And you can just see the love for those. We call Don the legend. I know that embarrassed him, but for a legend like that in junior hockey circles, because the amount of activity around Krupper's picture was pretty significant today. It's neat to see.
It is neat to see. And it did bother him when we referenced him as the legend, but when you call over 4,000 games in a league, I think the moniker comes with it, whether you like it or not.
Right? You have no choice right in the matter. You did it yourself.
Yeah, and I loved Krupper's tweet, and I thought it was perfect because he really was the Vin Scully or Ernie Harwell, depending on where you want to go, what city. But the longevity of his career and just how good he was, and like I haven't heard one person ever say a bad word about him. Like that says more about the man than the broadcaster to me.
Yeah, he was always the consummate professional and the truest of gentlemen as well. Not to go back into, although I think we could do every OHL Stories episode with more and more about Don, because he's got 4,000 plus games in 55 years that we could talk about.
Well, he'll already be pissed that we mentioned him on this podcast after talking about him so much last episode. So let's not anger the old man anymore.
Did want to just touch on our experience up in the Soo. It was a bit of an odd one because, and look, the schedule's quirky this year. We all get it. The Storm were just in the Soo this past weekend, and they played back-to-back, which is what the Rangers are going to do at the end of the season. The whole idea with the quirky schedule is to try to cut down on the amount of travel and hotel stays for the Rangers when they went up. And so our trip was a 3-day jaunt. You go up the day before, you play game day, and then you make your way home the next day. It's 3-day jaunt for one game. But it did allow us the opportunity to spend some time in the Soo. And I got to say, it's an OHL market that I got a lot of time for. The ownership group there and the commitment that they have shown to that franchise, to me, is pretty remarkable stuff. And got to find out a little bit about what they were going through when it all came crashing down back in March of 2020. You and I, Poper, have talked a lot about being a part of one of those final broadcasts. We were at the Sleeman Center, Rangers Storm on Wednesday, March the 11th. We finished our broadcast, and when that broadcast was done, the signs were starting to point to no more broadcasts after that. And so
yeah, I remember saying to you, we're done.
Yeah.
As soon as we saw the NCAA cancel March Madness, I thought, yeah, we're done. March Madness makes so much money, and if they're canceling that, we're done.
It wasn't the cancellation of the Elmira Maple Syrup Festival that tipped you off?
Listen, the Mennonite are a resilient bunch. And I have been to the Elmira Maple Syrup Festival. That one hit hard.
Yeah, for sure.
I had to make my own pancakes.
So if we go back to that time, the Soo Greyhounds were actually en route to a road game. They had gotten as far as Espanola, which isn't too far from Sudbury, when they were told, you know what, guys, turn it around. There's not going to be a game for you to get to. So they grabbed a bite to eat in Espanola and turned back around. And then this would have been Thursday the 12th. because we had finished Wednesday the 11th, Thursday the 12th. They're en route to a road game. There's not going to be that road game for the next day. So turn around, go back home. And all of a sudden then it's by order from the Ontario Hockey League, get the players back home because some pretty serious stuff is going on. So just imagine, we always associate the players on the team with the city they play in. But as you well know, like there's a reason that the Greyhounds' final game before the Christmas break is always in Southern Ontario, because these boys hail from, at least you can get to Toronto for easy access to other places, whatever. So you got a team, 20 plus hockey players, teenagers up in Sault Ste. Marie, and you've got about 36 hours to get them back home to their families. So all these phone calls start happening. How do you want your kid getting home? Do you want them on a plane? Do you want us to put them on a bus? Like, what's going to happen here to get your kid back to you? And they go through all of these logistics and make it happen. And then, of course, like the rest of us, we just wait and wait and wait for hockey to start up again. But when you think about the additional level of expense and logistics that's involved when you are operating the team furthest north in this Ontario Hockey League, and you never, unless I'm not paying enough attention, but you don't hear squawking about, ownership asking government for money or anything. Like they do their job and they put a damn fine product on the ice while they're at it.
They do, and it's one of the premier organizations in the Ontario Hockey League. Easy for me to say, in my opinion, year in and year out. And we talked about it when we were up there on the broadcast that, for the last probably 5 or 6 years since Kyle Dubas was up there, it's the same thing every time you go up. Like they're going to have a good power play. They're going to work hard. They're going to roll 4 lines, and they're going to be a good hockey team. And every year you think that they're not going to be a good hockey team. They just are a good hockey team. And I think they've created quite the culture up there, and they may not get as much credit as the London Knights. But I think they're right there right now. Like they year in and year out, they draft so well. We talked about it. They have the big 3 right now up there. Cartier, Kearns, and I apologize, I can't remember the other player on that line.
Cole McKay.
Cole McKay, thank you.
Yeah.
And they were all like a 5th, a 4th, and an 8th rounder, I believe. Like their drafting up there is just phenomenal, and they turn out superstars like Frost and Radish and so on and so forth. And they just continue to Darnell Nurse. They continue to do it year in and year out, and it can't be easy up there. Like imagine, we know how full an OHL bus is to go on a normal road trip. Imagine what it's like for the Sioux when they are coming down for that last game before Christmas, and all the players are going straight home from their game, let's say in Kitchener or Mississauga. So they have all their bags packed for their Christmas holidays, that they're going to have all their clothes for family, all their presents for family. All that's got to get on the bus. And then logistically, you mentioned the logistics, like that must just be a nightmare up there. I can imagine what it's like for, we don't have it that tough in Kitchener with travel, but to be up there in the Sioux and trying to do all of that, it's not easy, and they deserve the credit.
They absolutely do. And like you said, the product that they continue to churn out despite the off-ice challenges, if I can put them that way. Look, it's an obstacle that other teams don't face. It's as simple as that. So I just say good on them. And when you talk about the same thing year after year after year, I have to say I was really happy when we were up in the Sioux and we walked into the media room and the soup ladies were there. These are not like the Seinfeld soup Nazi. These are the ladies who insist, because you're in the Sioux, don't you know, you got to have a bowl of soup. But in a league that lost Bernice from the Owen Sound organization, that was just before the pandemic. And Bernice was a guest on our podcast way back in the day when it was still the Farwell and Pope brand podcast, but she was just an absolute sweetheart that took care of that media room. Kingston lost one of its media room matriarchs over the past year and a half. And fortunately, you go up to the Sioux and those same 2 lovely ladies are still there offering up a bowl of soup that they will then bring right over to your table as you're making your notes before the game.
Yeah, we've talked about it numerous times, but you said they're not like the soup Nazi. They kind of are, because you have to follow the protocol when you walk in. Instead of going up to the soup, if you will, the counter, thank you, and putting down your money and then moving to the left and pay and then taking your food, you walk in, they bombard you. There's no other way around. They bombard you. I hadn't had the C out of my name signing in before she was in my face, like feet away from me. Do you want soup?
You want soup?
Sure. And then you have to go to your table. Don't think about going up to pick up the soup. They won't let you take it. They will serve you. So there is rules when going into the Sioux media room. You say yes to soup, and then you sit down and they bring it to you. One package of crackers. That's it.
There will never be a time, though, that they say no soup for you in the
No
soup.
soup for you. No, of course not.
Always going to happen.
We should also give the Greyhounds credit because their closest trip is Sudbury. And I always thought, well, that's close. Like it's closer, an hour and a half, maybe, until this Sioux trip where I drove up myself on the day of the game, left at 9 a.m. from Kitchener. And I'm on this hike and I'm thinking, this is an 8-hour trip. And the night before you start questioning, I started getting a little nervous. I'm like, can I do 8 hours on my own? Like, it's a lot of driving straight. And then the morning of, I'm like, okay, no problem. I got snacks. I got my podcast I'm going to listen to the Mike Farwell show on City News 570. And
no, you didn't.
No, I didn't. And then you're driving up and I'm like, oh man, I've been driving a while. And then I look and it's like still an hour and a half to Sudbury. I'm like, holy jumping, this is a hike. And then I get to Sudbury and in my mind, I think, I'm already in Sudbury. I'm going to be so early to this game. I'm cruising. This is an easy drive. And then that drive from Sudbury to Sault Ste. Marie, it's another 3.5 hours. Like I thought it was an hour and a half. And that once you made it all the way to Sudbury, then to go another 3.5. Oh, that was the worst part. I'm like, I feel so close. So for them to have that kind of travel routinely and still be able to put a good product out on the ice, like I give them more credit for their fast starts on the road than any other team ever, because bus legs just takes on a whole other animal when you're playing up in the Sioux.
So just think now, the Sioux trips are Sarnia, Windsor, Flint, Saginaw. That's the West Division in the Ontario Hockey League. I know we talked about this on our game broadcast. I'm not sure we got a chance to bring it up on the podcast. Even in normal times, there are additional games added to the Sioux schedule versus the Sudbury Wolves just because of geographic proximity. But if you were to ask me, it is high time this league almost rewarded the Sioux a little bit, gave them some closer trips, and created a North Division that would include Sudbury, North Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, and I would throw Barrie and Owen Sound into there as well. Barrie and Owen Sound play extra games against each other anyway. Put those two teams in with the 3 further north teams, and I think you've got the makings of a nice realignment with a North Division.
We want Dale DeGray on this podcast. Why do you have to piss him off? You think Owen
he's not
Sound's
going to like
that? No, he is not. Owen Sound is not going to like that in any way.
But it's nobody's fault but Owen Sound's that they're kind of landlocked that way, right? Like,
well, they are, but who's their rivalry in that North Division then?
Yeah, I suppose. As opposed,
There's
because the Highway 6 rival with Guelph. But then, so it becomes, you throw some extra Guelph games Owen Sound's way, just like you throw some extra Sudbury games Sault Ste. Marie's way. There are ways to do this, Chris.
Sure there are.
Yeah, if you're not an Owen Sound. Mr. DeGray, just respond to our emails, would you? Like, come on the podcast. We'll have some fun. Come on out to the coast. Have a few laughs. It'll be great.
I just think it's hard enough for Owen Sound to do what they do. We talk about Sioux getting credit. The Owen Sound, smallest market in the league. And they still have the same budgetary constrictions as many other teams. So for them to do what they're doing, and then if you were to take them and put them in a northern division, there's no rivalries there for them at all. There's no Rangers. There's no Knights that would draw well in Owen Sound. I'm sure Mississauga probably does pretty well in Owen Sound as a rivalry because Owen Sound beat them for their lone championship. I just think if you put them in that northern division, I think you bury the Owen Sound attack. I really do.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you make a really good point. It's not perfect. And I guess maybe what we have right now is as imperfect as we can make it, or as perfect as we can. It's perfect in its current imperfection, I think, is kind of what I'm getting at. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Just because of the teams that are there. But it's interesting you bring up Owen Sound and Mississauga as well, because there is some hand-wringing this past week in the Ontario Hockey League over the attendance numbers in Mississauga, which, look, we knew would be the case. Attendance is down across the league as it is, and everybody has been reminding anyone who will listen, about the point you just made. When Mississauga hosted that Memorial Cup in 2011, thank goodness for the faithful from the Bayshore that made that trek down to the Hershey Center, that's what it was called at the time, Paramount Fine Foods Arena, to watch the hockey games, because otherwise that Memorial Cup and that OHL final might have been a bit of a dud for the city of Mississauga.
Yeah, they were calling it the Bayshore South, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were so many Attack fans there. And listen, their fans are diehards.
For sure.
Like, there's not much else to do in Owen Sound. You know, in the winter months, you can do ice fishing during the day and then head to the Attack game at night. And that's just about it. There's, I think, one bar, maybe two. Like, there's Joe Tomatoes, which is like a Boston pizza type thing. There's not much to do up there, and it's Attack country. So I think if you were to put them in that division, I think it probably buries them. But you mentioned Mississauga. Listen, it's no secret that their attendance is always crap. Like, it is. But you need that GTA based team. We talked to David Branch about it, and it's important for the OHL to have a team right in the GTA, just to say that they have a team in the GTA. You need a team in the Toronto area. And yeah, there's not many fans because scouts can go other places, but there's a lot of scouts based in Mississauga. So, there's often as many scouts at the game as there is fans, because scouts don't have to drive very far. They can go to that game instead of driving to Saginaw to see Cole Perfetti.
One more quick thing on Owen Sound, because we were talking about them and we were just there this week. And did we not get the best day ever to go to Owen Sound for a hockey game? Beautiful sunny day, nice and mild. We got up there, we shot a little video right on the shore of the bay. You can follow along OHL Stories on Instagram, on YouTube, Facebook. We post all of this stuff up there for you. Poper's coffee reviews, little rants that I do every week called Fridays with Farwell. It's all on our OHL Stories social media channels. So check it out: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And
I wanted to do a little video. Wanted to do a little video too, but no day of the week starts with a C or a P, so I was kind of euchred.
Could make something up.
Yeah, well, I used to do a thing called the papal address, but I figured no, it's not bad. But your ranting is enough. We don't need me ranting as well.
And you got Chris's coffee reviews.
Yeah, I'll let my coffee and you do the ranting. But that day in Owen Sound was a beautiful day for more reasons than the weather up on the Bayshore. And that is because the Flint Firebirds handed the London Knights their first loss of the season. So we can stop hearing Ryan Payette start lobbying for a 68-0 season down in London.
Listen, Payette was the first one out with the excuse-making machine. I mean, my goodness gracious. If you are a writer on a junior hockey beat, do you keep the excuse-making machine beside you at all times? Because he just gave her a little crank. There we go. What's excuse number 13 coming? Oh, Luke Evangelista was not feeling well. Okay, and we'll crank it over one more time. What? Oh, the new import didn't have his paperwork to cross the border. Okay, we'll use that excuse too. Stop it already. Stop it. No asterisk going on a 9-0 start.
We are going to get Ryan Payette on this podcast.
No, we're
and
not
for OHL Stories, just for a 20-minute debate between you and Ryan Payette, and I'll play mediator.
Okay, put on a striped jersey. Because I'm ready for it. That guy.
I didn't say I'd be fair.
But you bring that up. I know I couldn't quite figure out where you were going until you mentioned Flint Firebirds. Can we just please acknowledge the individual behind the Oshawa Generals Twitter account? And before you start getting your knickers knotted, I want to take a moment to remind you, it's sports. Relax, have some fun. Every good story needs a villain, and the OHL has its villain. It's called the London Knights. Embrace it. Anyway, whoever is running, exactly
right.
So Payette does. Whoever's running the Oshawa Generals Twitter account sent out after the Firebirds' victory over the Knights last Saturday at Flint Firebirds on behalf of literally everyone. Thank you. Well played, Oshawa Generals social media manager. Well played.
So good. Literally on behalf of everyone. Thank you. What a great tweet after the game. They weren't even playing in the game, but they know, and they're playing into it too. The heel, if you will, of the London Knights. Flint responded, "We aim to please." which I thought was nice too.
Not bad.
That Twitter sphere is so, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's toxic is what it is.
But
It's
it could use some
extremely
fun.
well, and that's the thing, right? It started off with being fun, but now it's really went to that, like, that's where news breaks. That's where people get a lot of their information, and it allows people to just say whatever's on their mind, whether right or wrong, with no fear of repercussions, for the large majority of users. But I think that when it comes to sports and stuff like this is a real opportunity for teams to generate a fan base that they wouldn't. Seattle's had some really good tweets since they came in. Vegas was always really good. Florida is outstanding with the stuff with the Habs and selling the Aho t-shirt. Like, there's so much room for creativity and good nature ribbing. And that's what this world needs, something to provide some laughter. And I think these OHL teams hopping on board and not just tweeting out news releases and stuff like that, showing a little personality, it's good for the game. You're going to get a younger fan base in, and we know that the OHL fan base is majority older.
I wondered about that. And so I'm curious, you think, because you mentioned a different, you're reaching a newer audience, a different audience. I wondered how young it would be. And I only say that because oftentimes I feel like the old guy on Twitter, because after Twitter and Facebook, well, Facebook first, then Twitter, there are so many other platforms, from, Snapchat to Instagram to TikTok. I'm wondering who the demographic user of Twitter really is, but I was wondering about that. And if this does perhaps open up the game to a younger audience, because the wisecrack was made as we sat in Owen Sound on Saturday. Oh, here come the Owen Sound seniors, but that's not unlike most junior hockey markets. Peterborough's famously known for that too. Their Thursday night tradition for older people in Peterborough is to go to a Petes game. So I think the league generally does skew older. And if Twitter is going to be a medium that helps them reach a younger fan base, I'm even more in favor of it.
Yeah, we're seeing OHL teams have their own TikTok accounts already, mostly because their players are on TikTok, I'm sure, or friends and family are on TikTok. So this way you can show off your players and some of the personality. At the end of the day, yes, these are young athletes, student athletes, but they're young. Like, they're young people. They're 16 to 20 years old. So, you have to show that personality off and allow them to have a little fun. And if you can do some funky dances or whatever on TikTok and do some funny videos, makes their experience better. And I think you will pull in some of that younger crowd. So I think it's important for some of these teams to be on some of these social networks and try to do things to get that young generation in, because we're seeing it right now more than ever with COVID. The large majority of OHL season ticket holders and people who go to games are older. Those are the people who are at the most risk. Those are the people that have sadly passed away because of COVID. And those are the people that, even with the double vaccination, don't want to go into a building of 7,000 people. And quite frankly, I don't blame them. I don't feel that comfortable being in a building with 7,000 people. And I'm young. I'm not going to say I'm fit, but I'm double vaccinated. So I can imagine the thought process they have of, is it worth me going and spending X amount of dollars on season tickets this year, or do I just listen on City News 570?
I look forward to the days where we are done having these conversations. Not that any of the points you just made are invalid. It's just, it's so exhausting after all of this time. But here we are, and you're on the mark. I can't wait until we're focusing exclusively on the games. And I'm glad that's why we have this podcast, to focus on the games and some of the great stories from the games. And we've already made reference to the city, where our guest this week scored the biggest goal in that franchise's history. And it's a proud history too. So this is pretty significant.
It is. Peterborough Petes only one Memorial Cup championship in over 45 years. Whoa. Yes, they've won numerous OHL championships. Yes, they've hosted, but only one Memorial Cup title. And Bob Attwell scored the overtime goal against Brandon Wheat Kings off a point shot from Larry Murphy. And he will forever not pay for a beer in the city of Peterborough because of that. Add on to it, he's connected through family to the McCrearys. Obviously, the McCreary name and hockey go hand in hand. And he played 22 games in the National Hockey League. And he took some time to tell us a few good OHL stories. Bob Attwell, or Gunner.
Bob, there's a lot to talk about including the biggest goal in Peterborough Petes history to this day, and it was scored more than 40 years ago. But before we even get to that, I'm curious how a guy from Spokane, Washington ends up playing in all places, Peterborough.
Yeah. Kind of a long story. I think I might have mentioned this to you before, but my father was a hockey player as well. And he was out in Spokane playing with the Comets at the time in the old Western League. But my dad spent years in the American League with the Cleveland Barons, Buffalo Bisons at that time. He played some years in the Quebec League with Chicoutimi and the Quebec Aces. Back in my dad's day, they were owned by teams at a young age, and he was at first owned by Boston, and then Montreal came along and wanted him to sign, and my dad didn't know any better, so he signed with Montreal. Boston found out about it, and he got suspended. His last year junior, he got suspended for a year because he did that. So interesting stories in his career, but he bounced all over the place. We spent years in Cleveland and Buffalo. First year of expansion, he got picked up by St. Louis. So we spent a year there. And like I said, I was born in Spokane when he was playing with the Chiefs or Comets, and then I ended up came back. We always came back to Canada, Ontario, up to Sundridge in the summertime, and I grew up there and played my minor hockey in Sundridge, small little town in between Huntsville and North Bay. And then I moved away to play junior B in Bramalea with the Blues, and got drafted by Peterborough. Roger Neilson was in Peterborough at the time. And that's how I ended up in Peterborough.
Because your dad played hockey, was hockey always your dream?
Yeah, you know what? Yes, I have to say everybody in Canada grows up playing hockey, but yeah, I was more involved in it. When Dad was playing pro, he'd take me to the practices. I'd sit in the dressing room with their trainers, and I'd go out on the ice before the practice and after the practice, and all of the players on his teams were good to me. So it was hockey was always a big part of my life. I had uncles who were NHL players, a cousin who was an NHL player. And my cousin was an NHL referee, so it's all in the family. Yeah.
So what's it like for a kid from small town Sundridge, which, by the way, I knew as soon as you mentioned it because it happened to be an accidental stop on a road trip I was on with a buddy a few summers back, and we ended up overnighting there. So I got to know the town a little bit, but it's got to feel pretty special to be the kid from Sundridge that gets drafted into the Ontario Hockey League.
Yeah, you know what? For sure it did, but this little town of Sundridge, 1,000 population, it's got seven people who grew up here that played in the NHL. Bucko McDonald, I don't know if you remember that name, but he was the oldest, and he played on 2 Stanley Cup winners. He was the oldest guy from Sundridge that played. Then there was Greg DeVries, more recent, played with Colorado and won a Stanley Cup there. And then I had 2 uncles who grew up here, my dad and my brother-in-law. So Sundridge has created a few hockey players.
Well, they still have hockey camps up there. My brother went up to a hockey camp up in Sundridge. They're major camps up there.
Yeah.
Bob, I want to ask, if you were ever on the internet and you tend to Google your name, or if you're just showing someone your stats and you look at the Hockey DB page, or you look at your time in the OHL, do you ever look at that hairdo and think, man, that's sweet? You had a little Shawn Michaels thing going, long blonde hair, looked like you should have played on the West Coast instead of in Colorado.
Chris, that's a great question, because I get asked that and given a hard time about that hairdo from many people. But it's funny you mention that. That one of the reasons, not the only reason, but Ron Dugay, you probably remember that name. He, my first year in the league, he was in Sudbury, and he was a great hockey player. But he had that hairdo, and I kind of, because I always had straight hair, I thought, let's try and have that Dugay look. So I got the perm there for 1 year, and that was it.
Let's be honest, neither Chris nor I should be asking anybody about their hairstyle today or ever.
Well, that's why I brought it up. And for people watching on YouTube, look at that. Look at that. Man, I am jealous.
When you look back, Bob, haircuts aside, hairstyles aside, do you recall a welcome to the OHL moment when you realized, now I'm in a place where, these games matter and there's competition for the next level?
Yeah, for sure. You always remember your first training camp. And I had played junior B, and that kind of gets you ready for it. But junior A is that next step. And I remember going to camp, and I don't know if you guys remember a guy named Ron Mason. He was a great player. He scored, like, my first year there, he scored 52, 54 goals, something like that. And then he was tragically killed in a car accident that summer. But he would have been a great player. He was great friends with Dale McCourt. They were buddies. But anyways, what I was getting to is Ron. I got to be a line mate with Ron my rookie year in training camp, and he just kind of guided me along. And the coaches and the staff in Peterborough actually told me that Ron was a guy who, they asked him about me, and do you think this kid should make the team? And Ron more or less vouched for me and said, yeah, give him a chance. I think he's got some tools. So that was, just going through that training camp and being tutored by Ron Mason. And then you meet other guys. Keith Acton was there. Mark Curtin was there. We had some great players that you just watch and you learn from. And being in Peterborough and being drafted by Roger Neilson, the big name, it just, you're there, and that's when you sort of realize, hockey's fun, but now it's getting to the point where this is going to be my job. This is what I want to do. Yeah.
You mentioned Roger. What was it like the first time you met him?
Roger he's a great guy. He's a hockey guy. He was so passionate about hockey, and he was such an honest guy. Like, he would tell you right away what you did well and what you didn't do well. And I can remember he always said to me, you've got great puck handling skills. You're a great skater, but he said, you don't win too many battles in the corner for the puck. He said, if you want to go anywhere, that's what you have to do better. Yeah.
From that time as a rookie to your final year with the Peterborough Petes, that of course was the year 78-79 when the team won that Memorial Cup. And it's hard for me to comprehend, Bob. And I wonder about you as an alum thinking back, because historically you just look by the numbers, and Peterborough's been to more finals than any other team, but they've only got that one championship. To this day, does that, like, I see you nodding along as we're having this conversation. It's pretty, you would never have thought of it then, obviously.
Never. There was great teams before our team, and probably better teams after our team. I mean, they've produced Chris Pronger, Steve Eiserman, Mike Ricci. The list goes on and on and on. And so many teams, even the team, our team lost in the final the year before we won it. And then the year after that, they lost in the final again. So yeah, to say that we were the only team to win a Memorial Cup in Peterborough, It's hard to believe, but it's something that everyone on that team, we cherish that. It's great.
Take us through the goal. Larry Murphy took the shot. What did you see?
Yeah, you know what? I remember it perfectly. There was a dump in. I chased the puck into the corner. Billy Gardner was there with me, and I think it was guards actually passed it back to the point to Murph, and I went to the front of the net. Murph took the shot, and the rebound came right to me, and their goalie was pulled out of the net, so I had a wide open net to shoot at, and that was it. It was, and I can remember the celebration. It just went crazy, but everyone's jumping on everybody, and guards jumps on me, and he goes, "Hey, Gunner, just make sure you get me the assist on that goal." Whatever, guys.
If I could follow that up real quick, you look at traditional hockey nicknames like Attwell, I would go Weller or Atsy or something. Where did Gunner come from?
Yeah, that's a good story. There was an old trainer in Peterborough, not when we were there, because as you know, Dick Todd was our trainer. But it was his name was Gunner Lynch, and he used to come around the rink the odd time, and he talked kind of in a unique way, and I could imitate him pretty well. So I got stuck with the name Gunner.
I gotta ask, since we're talking about that goal and that championship, and I feel bad doing it, but if you were to talk to Brad McCrimmon, the defenseman playing against you, he will insist that the play prior to the goal that you scored, Murphy's point shot, you on the rebound, was actually an icing that was not called. Was it an icing, Gunner?
Not a chance. Not a chance. And I respect the heck out of Brad McCrimmon. He was a great hockey player. I think he played 58, 59 minutes that game, but yeah, no way that was icing.
So his name came up. He was the defenseman who took the shot, Larry Murphy. As a Red Wing supporter in my childhood, thank you, Leafs, for trading him to Detroit and letting us win another Stanley Cup. But what was Larry like?
Murph was a great guy. That was actually his rookie season. But even as soon as he came to training camp, he was such a big guy, and you could tell right away he was going to be a great hockey player. And he was great for us that year. He was so poised, so calm with the puck. And he carried that on into the NHL. That was obviously his strength with the puck, and so never got rattled in any situation. And yeah, Murph was Murph. We loved to give him a hard time, but he took it, and now he's got the last laugh. He's in the Hall of Fame.
What would you give him a hard time about?
Just about, because he was a rookie and we were the
Yeah.
vets, and you give the rooks a hard time, and he Murph, he was kind of a quiet kid, didn't say a whole lot, but he once he got to know everybody and got to feel part of the team, he just fit right in, and he was a great player for us.
I read an interview recently with your coach, Gary Green, who suggested, and I'm curious about the wording that he used, because he said he had to be pretty demanding of you guys during that intermission after the third going into the overtime. You scored 2.5 minutes in, so it didn't take long. But when he said he had to be pretty demanding to get you refocused, because I guess the guys maybe felt that you should have won it in regulation and just couldn't. What do you remember from what Coach Gary Green told you after that third period?
Yeah, you know what? I just remember it being pretty quiet. And I remember more Greener trying to build us up and get us ready for the overtime, and make sure that we weren't down, and not second guessing ourselves. Just think positive, and who wants to get that next goal and who wants to score the winner. It was just we we didn't have, as you know, we didn't have a team of superstars. Although we had Murphy and we had Crowder and we had Greg Theberge and Billy Gardner, who went on to have good careers, but most of us were plumbers and muckers, and yeah, we just stuck together, and I just remember it being pretty quiet, and Greener just reinforcing to be ready and be positive.
Gary Green is maybe someone, Farzy, we should try to get on this podcast because he's got a wild story himself. But when he was coaching you, he was in his early 20s. How weird was it to have such a young coach during that time of your life?
It was weird, but you know what? I'm not sure I've had a better coach than Greener. And I think it was because he was so close in age to us. He just could relate to us. He knew how we were feeling. He knew if we needed a boot in the rear end or a pat in the back. And he would do things that, like, he dragged us away. We were in the playoffs one time. We were having a tough time, and he said, "Okay, we're getting out of town. We're going up to a hotel, and we're going to spend some time, just the team." And he'd do that all the time just to get us together. And I don't know, he was amazing. And we played jokes on him because he was so young. I remember we put the tape on the bottom of his blades. He couldn't see it, and he stepped on the ice and he wiped out. And he was so mad, and he threw the stick up in the stands, and he said, "Okay, you guys are on your own for the rest of this practice." And we could do all that, and then the next day he was fine. It was, I don't know, we just had that relationship with him, and we still do to this day. Greener keeps in touch with all of us. We have reunions every year. He was just a special guy. We couldn't have had a better coach.
So while we're on the subject of coaches, and you mentioned that Greener was probably the best you had, I guess that means better than, even though it was a brief time in Colorado, but somebody by the name of Don Cherry, if I'm not mistaken, Bob, was the coach of the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah. Well, Don Cherry, yeah, he always called me Ronnie, because in the American League, he played against my dad all the time. My dad's name was Ron. So the first training camp I was there, he came up to me, we're skating around the warm up, and he says, "Hey kid," he goes, "if you're half as good as your dad was, you'll have a good career." I remember that. But he always called me Ronnie. But Grapes, you know what? You guys probably know Grapes, and I've heard all the stories, but he was a great motivator. As far as a systems coach, I wouldn't say there was much there, but he got the most out of all the players. And if you didn't want to play for him, you wouldn't play. But if you were willing to sacrifice and give 110%, then you would play. So always liked Grips.
The debate between who was the better player, you or your father, I think it's pretty close. 22 games each in the National League. You each scored a goal.
Yeah.
He's got you beat on the assists though by 2. Did he ever give you the gears?
Well, he always said he had the upper hand there. But yeah, if there ever was a comparison, my dad would be the much better player. He grew up when it was tougher to make it the 16 league and all that. But yeah, if he'd have come up in my day, he'd have had a good career.
What are the chances? Father and son both play the same amount of games and with the same amount of goals. I think it's crazy.
You know what? I use as a hockey trivia. What father-son combination scored the same amount of goals?
We're going to remember that one. We'll have to use it too.
Yeah.
I want to go back to that 78-79 season in Peterborough, because you mentioned it, Bob. Not a superstar laden team by any stretch, and the team prior and the team after also went to the Memorial Cup and couldn't do what you and your teammates did that season.
Yeah.
Again, echoing Gary Green, but he pointed to a game in January when you played the Niagara Falls Flyers and had a third period comeback as kind of the moment where he recognized that, this team maybe has what it takes. Do you remember that game and that comeback?
I don't remember that game in particular, but I do remember our comeback to beat Niagara Falls in the playoffs.
Yeah, the final. I wondered about that too. As obviously the Memorial Cup would stand out, but you had to come back from 3-1 down, didn't you?
We did.
Yeah.
We did. And as you know, Niagara Falls had a great team. They had Stan Adams, Steve Larmer, Steve Ludzik. They had a great team. And you know what? We just found a way to battle back and win that series. That was a highlight. That was a great series to win.
Which series was harder to win? That one against Niagara or the semifinals against Sudbury with the likes of Foligno, Dave McQueen, who we've had on this podcast, and some guy who's coaching down in London and done pretty well for himself.
Yeah. You know what? We actually went through 3 tough series that year. The first round we played Kingston, and they had us. I think they jumped out to, if I remember correctly, they jumped out to 2-0 lead, and we came back, won that in 6, and then Sudbury took us to 6 games as well. And yeah, they also, besides Foligno and Hunter, they had a player named Scott Gruel. I don't know if you remember him at all. He was a great player in junior, scored 50 some goals probably that year. But they and Dave McQueen, they had firepower like you wouldn't believe. But yeah, they were all tough series. And you know what? That might have got us prepared for the Memorial Cup, because that wasn't easy either. But yeah, that was a tough road, but all good series.
What was it like having the Peterborough Memorial Center, as your home rink? Chris and I always enjoy going mostly for the history, but watching games there too. We call them the square corners. I'm sure you know, like the oddities of that arena. What's it like having that as home ice?
Yeah. Well, we obviously use that to our advantage. We would practice dump ins and shooting around the boards, and we would know the bounces that it was going to get. So we would use that to our advantage. The other teams, they wouldn't know it as well as we did. Our fans were second to none. I mean, we couldn't get as many fans as Ottawa did, or the bigger arenas. But as you know, in Peterborough's a hockey town, and the fans stood behind us. It was a great place to play.
I'm going to ask you about a player that you may not be asked about that often, but the year before you won the Memorial Cup, you played with Jeff Brubaker. I looked at the stats. He had over 300 penalty minutes in 68 games. Like that's over 4.5 a game. What was it like? Was he just fighting everybody back then?
Yeah, the Brew man, I don't know if there's a better guy in hockey than Brew. He came in, he was playing university, I think down in Michigan. He was at a school in Michigan, and we got him halfway through the year. And when he joined the team, it was just such a huge difference. Like he would go through the freaking wall or through the end of the rink for anybody. And yes, he fought every game. I remember a game in Ottawa, he fought Hospodar, then he fought Rory Cava, then he fought Hospodar again. And it was like, come on, Brew, you're not tired? And he wasn't. And then he'd fight Koulis, and he'd fight Willie Huber and Secord. And yeah, it was Brew, and he could play. Like he scored 20 goals his last year junior, on the line with Mark Curtin and Keith Crowder. Great line. And you know what? I just saw Brew probably 5 years ago. We were playing a game down. He lives in Carolinas now, and got together for a little charity game. And he showed up, and it was funny. He walked in the room, and he had this. It was like a freaking army bag, and we're all watching him. We're all getting ready to get out there, and Brew walks in and just kind of grabs a bag and starts dumping it on the floor, and his skates come out, hockey pads, shin pads. And we go, what the heck, Brew? And he still had the old tube skates from way back. He goes, yeah, I haven't skated in about 5 years, boys. He just broke out. But there isn't a better guy and a guy that would have your back more than Brew. Yeah, great guy. Great guy.
When we look back, Bob, at the game of that era, late 1970s, you almost needed a Brew on your team, didn't you?
Oh yeah, yes, it was, yeah, you had to defend yourself, and you had to, I wasn't a fighter, you guys know that, but sometimes you had to show up, and you needed the guys like Brew. I can remember a game in Hamilton when they had Bert Templeton coaching, and brawl broke out in the warm-up, and they had guys like Tim Coulis and Willie Huber, Al Secord. They had a bunch of big boys who were known for scrapping. And Brew, we had Brew and Keith Crowder, and those are the guys that kept those guys at bay. So yeah, for sure. In those days, you needed a Jeff Brubaker. For sure you did.
You mentioned his name earlier, but looking back on your time in Peterborough, do you ever take a second and think, Dick Todd was our trainer? Like the legendary career of Dick Todd, and he was your trainer at that time. Of course, Gary Green had talked about how he just said, well, you're training and we don't have any assistant coaches and I don't have an assistant GM. So you're both of those now too.
Yeah.
But what would you ever look back and just think Dick Todd was my trainer? That's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was weird. But we, as the players there, we knew Dick was more than a trainer. He would give us pointers all the time too. Kid, you're not doing this right, or you're not doing that right. And we knew, he was always in with Greener in the office discussing what they were going to do, what their, line changes they were going to make, who was going, who wasn't going. Dick's a smart guy. He's a sports guy. He knows his hockey. And yeah, it didn't surprise me that he went from trainer on our team to a great career in the NHL coaching.
When you played, who was the biggest rival?
It would have to be Oshawa at that time, our next door neighbors, and they had a great team at that time too. Tom McCarthy was there, Lee Norwood on defense. They had a bunch of guys who had good careers. Claude Julian, who's coaching. He might be fired now, is he? But he's coached for quite a while. They had that was our biggest rivalry, and they had a good squad. So we went toe to toe with them quite a few times.
I didn't want to lead you too much on that, just because anytime we talk to a Pete on this podcast, that's what you get. And I would argue, I think Chris and I have, in fact, that Oshawa Peterborough to this day remains the best rivalry our league has, in my opinion.
Does any game stand out that you're like, wow, that was a bad one? Because we had Scott McCrory on and he talked about getting in a line brawl, a team brawl in the tunnel. Like the team was running around to the other side to fight Peterborough, even like off the ice.
Yeah. No, I heard about some of those. We never, in my day, we never had any brawls break out. There was lots of fighting on the ice, obviously, but nothing that spread into the hallway or off the ice. Lots of good games, lots of games that went into overtime. But not, one game I guess that would stand out in my mind is in Peterborough. I was actually lucky enough, I scored another overtime goal, and that was to beat Oshawa in Peterborough.
That's a nice one.
Yeah.
You got the overtime Midas touch, Gunner.
Yeah.
The boys always tell me that one goal has carried me a long ways.
Do you ever get sick of talking about it though? Because as you said, when you mention your name, that's the first thing despite 22 games in the National League and a long pro career, that is the one thing people are talking about first. Do you ever get sick of it?
Never.
I didn't think so.
I could no. No, and you know what, Greener, after I scored that, Greener came to me and he goes, you know what, this is going to be a goal you never forget. And he's absolutely right. I mean, there was, I don't know if I would call that the highlight of my career, because playing your first game in the NHL was always a highlight. Scoring the goal in the NHL was a highlight. Playing for Grapes was a highlight. Getting to know Lanny McDonald, Wolf Paymont, all those guys are highlights. But yeah, tough to beat that one goal.
So let's talk about it a little bit more, because when I watched that goal, it sounds like the sort of thing that coaches are telling players all the time. You want to score, go to the net. You see Murphy about to step into one, and I mean, you collect that rebound, but it sounds, when you talk about it, it sounds a lot easier than it actually is. Were you deliberate in your movements prior to that shot to get to the area where there might be a rebound?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Like, I can remember the puck got dumped in, and I chased it into the corner with guards. And I have a tough time remembering this, but it must have been guards who got it back to Murph. And I just remember, okay, I got to get to the front of the net. There might be a rebound here. And sure enough, it happened.
Do you still pay for a beer in Peterborough?
Never. I got the key to the city. Didn't you know that?
What is it like going back though? I know you guys just had, I think it was the 40th year anniversary in 2018? Would that be right? My math? Yeah.
Yeah. It's still, you can't believe the amount of people in Peterborough who still remember that 40 years ago. And what was neat about that is all of our players showed up from that team, except God bless him, Mark Reeds passed away. But even the two Finns, Anssi Melametsa and Veli Kanunen, came over from Finland. And you know what? We got together, and it was just like 40 years was gone. We had never been apart. It's amazing how that happens, because you know, we all went to Peterborough as teenagers, kind of learning life, learning hockey at the same time, and you kind of grow up together. And I think it's something that's so powerful. And then if you're lucky enough to win a championship, you never forget it, and you don't forget those guys who were part of that. They're like, you're forever brothers. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but it's not a cliche. It's really the way it is.
You mentioned a name earlier. Speaking of brothers and family, you've documented how many, uncles, cousins, your father, etc., all the players from Sundridge that went on to pro careers. But you mentioned a name earlier, Greg Thaberge. And if I've got the family ties correct here, it would be your nephew, Brett, that ended up playing for the Peterborough Petes as well, because your former teammate, Greg, married your sister. Is that how does this all work out? I got the dots connected?
That is correct. You've got the dots connected. Yeah.
Was he a guy on your team that you thought, I'd let you date my sister? Or did this come about and you were like, no?
Get away from that guy.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually my fault. I invited Greg up to my place in Sundridge for the weekend, and he ended up spending more time around my sister than me. So that's how it started. So I take the blame.
Darn teammates.
So what was it like watching another generation play for that same team that both you and Greg played for?
Yeah, we went down and watched many games, and it was pretty cool actually watching Brett play there. And they didn't have the success that our teams had, and I think that's tough on any kid, if you're lucky enough to get on a good team, it's much easier for your skills to show through than if you're not on a winning team. So I mean, he enjoyed his years in Peterborough for sure, but not being on a winning team, I think, was tough on him and everybody there. Yeah.
You were on some winning teams before you made it to the OHL, winning a couple provincial championships with the Mac Lang All-Stars. And
wow, you've done your research.
And your father was the coach, if I'm correct, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
What was that like, winning provincial championships when your father is your coach?
That was it was, what winning at any level is special. And my dad was a great coach. Very good at teaching the fundamentals, obviously. He was hard on me, and he realized that afterwards. But I think that was good for me. At the time, it wasn't so good for me, but I think it paid off in the end. Yeah, of course, he paid more attention to what I was doing and what I wasn't doing, and he let me know that. But he was a great coach. Everyone on those teams that we won with still remember Dad and what he meant to them and how he taught them the game and the right way to play it. And yeah, we definitely had a great relationship because he did coach me for sure.
It's interesting because we were chatting just before we started this recording, Bob, about my father, who was in education. And at one point, he was my high school principal. And I can tell you, not the best years of my life, to be honest. So, but Dad for a coach, a little bit better than Dad for a high school principal, I'm hearing.
Yeah, a little bit.
Little bit. Winning helps too, I suppose.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Bob, as we sit here for our people who are listening by a podcast and not on YouTube, you have a photo of what I can only assume is Colorado Avalanche players' names, the jerseys in the stall, and then I'm assuming, because I've seen these before, one of those jerseys probably says Attwell on it.
That is correct. My uncle, Keith McCreary, who played many years in the NHL, he gave me that was my 50th birthday present. And it's got my name in between Sakic and Forsberg and Pierre Roy. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, because those jerseys suck when it comes to Colorado NHL standards, because those jerseys you guys wore were fantastic.
They were the best, weren't they? I love those colors. Yeah.
And with your long blonde flow too, it just added to it so much. There's a couple of great photos. What do you remember from your time playing in Colorado?
I remember Grapes, of course, being a tough coach. Players he liked and didn't like, and he made it. I mean, I always tell people when they ask me what you saw on TV, it's pretty much how Grapes was. He just said it how it was, and if he didn't like you, he would let you know. If he did like you, he'd let you know too. But as long as you gave it your all and worked for him, you were in his good books. What I also remember are the big name players. We had Lanny there. I remember getting my first NHL paycheck, and Lanny came over to me and he said, "Come on, kid, you're coming with me. We're going to put that in the bank. You're not going to spend it." So I always appreciated that. And Lanny would have all the rookies over to his place for pregame meals. Lanny was Lanny. He was a great leader, and everyone respected Lanny. Rob Ramage, he was the same age as me, but he was coming in to start a great career, and Rammer was just an unbelievable guy, and he was such a tough guy and skilled. And I can remember the veterans would always be on Rammer the way they're on rookies, but they were relentless because they knew how good Rammer could be. And he broke through that barrier, and and had a great career. But I remember him. Rennie Robert was there. Wilfie Paymont. Well, he was traded for Lanny, but I remember him. I just remember being in the NHL, and I only played 22 games, but just the level of the hockey, and wishing I could have stayed there longer. But it's an experience I'll never forget. That's for sure.
You were there, and the records show that you've got that goal to your credit that we only alluded to. We've spent a lot of time almost going through a play-by-play of that overtime winner with the Petes for the Memorial Cup. Tell us about the NHL goal.
You know what? It was, thinking back now, and I've never thought of it this way, but it was a lot the same as the overtime goal. It was a rebound. It was against Detroit in Colorado. Jimmy Rutherford was the goalie, and yeah, rebound, and I stuffed it in. The worst memory I have of that game is I should have had a second goal, and it would have been much prettier. I went around the defenseman, his name, it was Jimmy Korn, and I beat him to the outside, was going to my backhand, lost the puck. Otherwise, I'd have stuffed it upstairs, but would have had to.
Then you would have had bragging rights over your father.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. In those 22 games, you say you only played 22. You played in the show. You could have taken one shift and you could, you ride that for the rest of your life. Yeah. But was there any player on the ice, either on your team, whether it was Lanny or someone you played against, where you were like, holy cow, that's so-and-so? Like, I've made it.
Yeah, I'm Wayne Gretzky, of course.
Yeah, he does that.
Yeah. And I, you know what, Wayne was so modest. I played against him first in junior B. He came in, played half the year, and he won the rookie of the year. Then he's still playing junior B, and I'm in Peterborough, and we call him up for 4 games. And I remember at the time the coach was, I think it was Gary Young at that time. And Younger says, yeah, we got this kid Gretzky coming in, so you're gonna have to move from center to the wing to make room for him. And I said, okay, whatever. But even at, I think he was 14 or 15 at that time, and he didn't score, but whenever he had the puck, he did the right thing, right? And he was just a skinny little guy, but you could tell he was special. And then the next year he goes to Sault Ste. Marie, and he's freaking led the league in scoring and lit it up, and you know the rest of the story. But yeah, Gretzky he was just head and shoulders above everybody else.
It's funny because when you mentioned Tom McCarthy's name earlier with Oshawa, that was obviously who Oshawa took instead of Wayne Gretzky. And Sherry Basson told us that story on a previous episode of this podcast. But you must have been watching this kid up in the Sioux saying, hey, I shifted positions for that guy last year.
Yeah.
After your time in the NHL, 2 years later, you find yourself in the American League with the Moncton Alpines. You had a teammate who we've had as a guest on this podcast, Joe Macdonald. Do you have any Joe Macdonald stories for us?
Man, are you serious? I got lots of stories. Joe and I are best of buddies. His wife and my wife and our kids, we spent tons of time up at Joe's cottage up in Port Loring. So I've got lots of Joe stories. Nobody beats Joe. I rode the bus with him when he was coaching the Kitchener Rangers, and went through the tough losses that he went through it. The Memorial Cup when they lost to Oshawa. Lindros, I think, was on that team, right? Correct?
Yep. You got it.
So I've got some. I mean, Joe was a great player, had a great shot. He was a great coach. He was a great teammate. I don't know what kind of stories you want me to tell, but I've got lots of stories.
I want a story that probably was told around the bonfire up at Joe's cottage or something. over a couple Molson Canadians.
Oh, we've got some good ones. It was a joke when we played in Moncton. Joe's roommate was always Lowell Loveday. I don't know if you remember Lowell, played in Kingston. And my roommate was always Al Hill. So when we'd go on a road trip, Al and I would always, we'd go with the rest of the team. We'd venture out to the bars and have a few beers. And Joe and Lowell would never, we'd never see them. So we got to be, I don't know, halfway through the year. And we said, what the heck are you guys doing with your time? Like, we're out at the bars having a couple. And they'd sit in their hotel room and they'd buy a 6-pack and they'd have some beer and they'd order in pizza. And, we call them the closet monkeys because they'd never come out with the team to the bars. They'd stay in their hotel room.
Cheap.
Yeah, that's just
saving money.
Frugal. That's the word that us cheap guys like. It's frugal. That's
Right.
what it is.
Yeah.
Not too long after, Bob, the career takes you to Europe and you get to play professional hockey there. And judging from the teams you were a part of, you saw some pretty nice parts of Europe, it would seem. But what led you overseas?
I actually knew a guy, worked at a hockey school, the hockey opportunity camp, with a guy named Dave Sherlock. And Dave had played over there for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And then he got into coaching and he approached me probably 2 years before I went over. He said, whenever you think your career is done over here and you might be interested in coming over to Europe, just give me a call. So I called him and went over. He was in a small, coaching a team in Bad Tolz. It was in the 2nd division in Germany. So that's where I spent my first year there, and then it just continued from there.
If we can go back to the Memorial Cup for just one question I wanted to ask, because 3 teams were 2-2 at the time of the round robin being over, and then they went to goals for, goals against for the final. I didn't take a look at the schedule, but do you know who, like the final game of the round robin, which would have left 3 teams 2-2, either A, were you guys a part of that final game and knowing that it was going to come down to goals for and goals against, or were you guys watching thinking we have a chance here?
Yeah, no, we were watching. It was Brandon playing against Three Rivers, Trois-Rivières. Yeah.
Were you nervous watching that game?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we kind of had a slow start. We lost to Trois-Rivières in the first game. So that put us behind the 8 ball when you're only playing four games. It's and you lose your first game, you're like, what the heck? And then we ended up losing one to Brandon in the second game we played against them. But yeah, I mean, we were sitting watching that last game and knowing that Brandon had to beat Trois-Rivières for us to get in there, and that's what happened. Yeah,
That's got to be so nerve, because you're right, it's out of your hands.
Yeah. Well, we put ourselves in that situation, right? So.
And then you play. You need Brandon to win that game to get in, and then you end up playing Brandon.
Yeah.
In the final.
Yeah. But how about the year before? We beat New Westminster twice in the round robin. In that Memorial Cup, there was only 3 teams. So we beat New West twice in the round robin, meet them in the final, they beat us and win the Memorial Cup. Yeah.
Which was the bigger feeling, losing the Memorial Cup and that dejection, or scoring the overtime goal and winning?
Oh, easy, the overtime goal, for sure. But yeah, losing, especially when we thought we were the better team. And not to make excuses, Keith Acton was hurt going into the last game. We had one other, Tim Trimper might have been hurt as well. We had a couple key players who were hurting going into the last game. But anyways, I'm sure New West had some guys who were hurting as well. But it was tough knowing that we had beat them twice and we felt we were the better team, but didn't turn out that way.
We've talked about your nephew coming through the organization, obviously the opportunities to get together as alumni, some charity games that you've played in. How close to the junior game, the Ontario Hockey League, do you remain today, Bob?
Very close. Whenever I live up by North Bay now, so I attend many of the battalion games. Whenever I'm in Kitchener, I'll go to the Ranger games, and I make a point of, I go back to probably 3 or 4 Pete's games every year. Yeah, so I'm always checking the standings and seeing how the Pete's are doing, and so very close. I mean, OHL will always be near and dear to my heart for sure.
Farzy asked about overseas. Was playing overseas back then the same it is now, with suitcases of money being dropped off and maybe not being paid, and Russian gas and so on and so forth?
Well, I wish I didn't get any of those suitcases of money, but I did have to fight for money sometimes. I remember, I think it was my 3rd or 4th year, I was playing in Heilbronn in the 2nd league, and the owner wasn't paying. So I had to leave a couple of practices, go to his office and say, I'm not playing anymore if you're not going to pay me. And he'd scramble and come up with a paycheck. And yeah, so it was interesting times and interesting hockey, like very, very different hockey than over here. Over here, it's more intense and lots of body contact. And over there, it's like lots of cheap stuff. Kicking your feet out and sticking you from behind, and they seem to focus on the Auslanders or the imports and try and get them to react and take stupid penalties and all that stuff. And until you learn the system and learn what they're doing, their actions seem to work. But it was a great experience. Huge ice surface. So if you're a good skater, it's a fun place to play. And you do see a lot of Canadians that you played against back here, like Art Rutland was over there, John Markell. There was Paul Messier, Chris Valentine, a bunch of guys that you know, and you know when you play against them, you talk to them and have a beer afterwards. But yeah, I wouldn't trade it. It was a great experience, good way to see the country. But as far as the game goes, the game over here was much better than over in Europe.
Paul Messier, Farzy, is the guy that Billy McGuigan was talking about on their podcast last week, where they were both going for the same NHL team, and Paul ended up making it.
Yeah, it worked out okay for Paul.
Yeah.
But I think the quote I read, Bob, was something along the lines of, we're not the Sutters, but speaking with all the family that are involved, your family involved in the game. Over the years, have you taken the opportunity, probably more than once, I would guess, but kind of to reflect on what this game has meant to you and your relatives and what it's given you over the decades?
Oh yeah, it's given a lot of us a living for many years. It's given us a lot of joy and pleasure and careers. There's 7 of us who made careers out of it. Not long careers, but careers. And just whenever we get together, it's the conversation is hockey, and we played in family tournaments together after we were all retired. It's just, the memories and everything that hockey's been our life. And to a lesser extent, I mean, if you talk to the Sutters, they'd say the same thing, or the Hulls, or any of the families that have many Larmers, him and his brother. It's just, you grow up playing hockey, and if you're fortunate enough that you can make a long career or a short career or whatever length, and enjoy it, Yeah, hockey's been great to us for sure.
How many of those dinner chats revolved around telling Bill that he missed a call?
Which Bill are you talking about? There's about 3 of them.
Yeah, that's right.
All of them?
Yeah.
That's great.
If you can't even make fun of your relatives for blowing calls on the ice, who can you make fun of,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You know what, though? I would have to say, you guys might agree. I think Bill was one of the better officials in the game. He let the boys play and didn't seem to call any of the cheap stuff. But and I think it was because he played the game before, so he knew what everyone was going through and knew the game, and just told the guys, "Here's your limits. Stay within them. You'll be okay, and play the game."
Yeah, he had
And
a
I mean,
great
he
feel
had
for the game.
Had that helmet hair on too with the mustache. So who's going to say anything to him? Right?
Pretty boy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He
that's
always
right.
looked good. I'll say that.
Oh, Bob, it's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate you making the time for us to relive some of these memories. And hey, to this day and counting, biggest goal in Peterborough Petes history for the only Memorial Cup championship. That's pretty special 40 some odd years later.
Hard to believe, isn't it?
Sure is.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey,
Thanks
I appreciate you guys taking the time. I enjoyed it.
I tend to do this, but I got one more, Farzy, if I can, real quick.
Of course he does.
I was thinking about it earlier, I asked this question to just about every guest I think we have that's played in this league, especially around your generation. But that Windsor Arena, we talk about it every podcast. Man, it was tough. Do you have any memories from going into that Windsor Arena?
Yeah, Wayne Maxner. he was an asshole. No. No, I just kidding. Wayne was a great coach for the league, but I remember they had Herbie, Joel Quinville played for them. They had some great players there too. Blair Barnes was a good OHL player. But they had this little guy, and he played in the Sioux for a while, and he was just a shit disturber. Do you guys remember the name? But he would disrupt the game, and he wasn't a skilled player or anything. He would just go around and he would cause shit. So that's what I remember about going into Windsor, because you knew he was going to cause shit.
You had to deal with him.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. We'll find him and get him on the podcast.
Yeah, we just got to figure out who it is now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Lord
Bob,
knows they've had about, 100 of them that played
exactly.
on that team.
Yeah.
When we're up in North Bay, or you find yourself in an OHL rink with the Kitchener Rangers in town, make sure we greet one another in person, shake a hand, and do this in real life. But this has been a lot of fun, so thanks again.
You know what? I'm going to look for you guys whenever I'm around. If I'm in Kitchener or Kitchener's up in North Bay, I'll look for you guys.
Sounds
Please
good.
do.
We'll look forward to it.
Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.